pledged to do the following as we go into what we hope will be many brilliant ideas about how to solve our spending problem in Vermont. The first is, we will not support any mandates from Montpelier to local communities that increase property taxes without paying for them with general fund dollars, without paying for them from Montpelier. But we prefer not to have any tax. Second, and the Secretary will talk about this a little bit, but we are engaging in a partnership with local communities where our Secretary literally sits down with school boards, select boards, anyone that will listen, educators, teachers, to give them data that they've never had before that shows not only what we're spending now, but based upon the projections going forward the next 5 years and years going forward, what we think will happen with their school spending based upon their continued drop in student count, particularly in our rural communities. So there is no silver bullet that's going to solve our property tax challenge. What it will take is lots of loads of buckshot, lots of good ideas that we bring together to help reduce spending while we improve quality and outcomes for our kids in Vermont. So I'm going to turn it over now to Commissioner Peterson to talk a little bit about where we are with the current recommendation that will be going out later today. Take it away now.
Oh, thank you. So as many of you know, this is actually an exercise that's mandated by statute. Every year in the fall, legislative staff and administrative staff get together and forecast various components of the Ed Fund, and it is a complex exercise. And we're halfway through this school year, but what we're actually doing is projecting into next school year, the budgets that the school boards are working on now, and actually the rate that the legislature ultimately will set this session. So we've completed that forecast for the fall. Some of these numbers do continue moving, but I can walk you through it. As the governor mentioned, the projection right now is that we would need a 2-cent increase on both the property tax rate on residences and non-residences, and the rate that income sensitized payers will pay was 1.94%. That was actually set by the legislature in the last session. So walking through my letter, the educational inputs, the first thing we look at is the number of students, and that is projected to fall again, over 600 equalized pupils. That assumes that there won't be full implementation of the pre-K, but we are seeing an increase in the number of pre-K students. So that 600 decline is actually after adding some of the pre-K students that we've already seen. So that's continuing declining demographic in our students that we've seen for a number of years now. Our base education amount, that is the amount that the base rate support, does go up. It goes up by an inflation factor, and it's up over 1,000 per pupil this year. And then what we actually do, and this is actually interesting because it's a very interactive process, boards are just starting work on their budgets now, but we're actually projecting what we think their spending will come in at. Last year's spending actually came in slightly below what we had predicted in last December, so it came in about 3%, and we're predicting going forward it will stay at about 3%. That's actually premised on the Agency of Education's premise that there won't be a significant decline in staffing for next year. So that kind of bakes in about a 3% increase year over year. On the revenue side, our grant list is finally ticking up. That's after a number of years of decline. As you know, the Great Recession had a great impact on real estate, both in new construction and real estate values. We're finally seeing that trend go in the positive direction, which is great news. Property tax adjustments are up about $5 million this year. We've actually seen less claimants in FY15 than we had predicted in last December. But again, as I mentioned before, the rate that income sensitized payers are paying is going up to 1.94%. Other revenue sources are up. They now comprise nearly $500 million. It's up over $12 million from last year. As the governor was saying, that includes the general fund transfer directly from our general fund, 35% of the sales in use, a third of the purchase in use in the lottery ticket, And again, that's 30% of general fund sources, revenue sources are actually going into the ed fund at this point. So what the rates end up being is $1. What we're projecting would be $1 on the residential side, the 1.94 for the income sensitized payers, and 1.535 would be the non-residential rate. The residential rates, of course, are subject to adjustments for local spending decisions. And what is really emphasized in the letter, and what I know Secretary Holcomb will speak about and has been speaking about to local communities, is it's the local spending per pupil that will determine the local rate. So what that does mean, though, is that if a school might have a flat budget, but if they've either lost students or lost outside revenue sources, that spending per pupil is going to go up and their rate's going to go up. We heard a lot of confusion about that last year, why a budget could be flat, but the rate goes up. And because we have a statewide system, it's this local spending per pupil that's going to determine that local rate. And I know Secretary Holcomb will speak more about that. So just to recap why we're in somewhat better shape, though it's not great news, than we were last year. Again, we're seeing the grand list picking up. The spending slightly down, the income sensitivity as a general percentage being less, and the general fund transfer is actually up more than had originally been anticipated last year. So with that, turn it over to Secretary Holcomb.
In Vermont, it's a core value, and everywhere I go around the state, what I hear is how important the strength of our educational system is to both the state's economic future, but also its civic future. That's never been a question. What I am hearing as I go around the state is real concern about how we continue to support it in a way that makes that quality last. And what I'm hearing now is people concerned that the fiscal stresses that schools are experiencing is beginning to erode some of the quality that we care for our children. I had the privilege this year of spending a lot of time actually with the VSBA and the VSA and traveling around the state to meet the school board members in every single region of the state. I think we spoke to over 600 school board members. I've also had the privilege of meeting in many other contexts and visiting individual boards. And part of the purpose of that was to help local decision makers understand what their prospects are and what the demographic and the economic forecasts are for their region, so that as they begin to plan for stability in the future, they're doing so based on some of the best data that we have available. And we have some charts up here if you want to take a look at them later. But what we do know is that we've seen profound declines in enrollment, and in the same period, our staffing levels have held fairly stable. And as you know, in a per pupil formula, where the revenue received corresponds to the number of students that you serve, as your number of students declines, you get less revenue. If you are trying to support the same level of program, the same level of staffing, your tax rate will go up to support that same level of program. What I hear when I go around the state now is not board members cheering about the tremendous programs and opportunities they're able to provide. I hear people struggling to figure out how to maintain what they currently offer. We have school districts where they're looking at, just based on the population projections, increases of 60 to 80% in their tax rate over the next 5 years, just associated with that attrition, that loss of student enrollment. So when they're planning their budgets today, they need to be thinking about that future down the road and asking themselves if the decisions we're making today are ones that are going to preserve quality and sustain that school over the long haul. In some towns, those projections aren't turning around. In some towns, they are, and those will have to make different budgeting decisions. So what I've been trying to do is work with the VSA and the VSBA to help communicate directly with school boards, to present them with some of this data, but also to hear back from them some of the solutions that they're beginning to grapple with and try at the local level. And moving forward, one of the things I hope to do is to continue to partner with these agencies, with these organizations, to identify strategies that are promising that local board members are developing, whether it's consolidation, as we see in CSU, whether it's sharing of staff across districts, whether it's other efforts to seek scale, to try to help other boards around the state have access to the promising strategies that different districts are trying. Because I think what we all need to understand is that we're in a delicate position, and the status quo, maintaining the status quo is not really an option right now. What we need is the ingenuity of Vermonters to put their heads together, roll up their sleeves, and figure out some better ways to do education so we can preserve what we really care about, but do it in a more affordable way. In addition, I will be working closely with the agency and with the State Board of Education, both to compile the staffing data we have. We know that in the aggregate, staffing numbers have held pretty stable. We also know that there's some patterns within that we need to really break out and understand. For example, we know that the administrative overhead in our districts varies widely across systems. As an educator, I believe that we need to make sure our dollars are spent where they get the greatest difference, and that's on teachers and children in classrooms, and improving the relationship and the quality of the interaction between teachers and students. So I think we need to start looking at how different strategies that we're pursuing in different regions may or may not be more effective, and learning from that to try to encourage us to pursue school governance models that really get the dollars where they matter in the classroom. In addition, we will continue to try to work with districts that seek us out. We've had many school boards contact us to ask us for examples of how districts have gone about some of this work. We've collaborated with VSBA, VSA, and VSBIT to put together a manual, and I think you'll speak to that later, that provides guidance, very concrete guidance for districts who want to explore some options for mergers. And we're also working to pilot some initiatives around special education to see if there are ways that we can support school districts in ways that help them intervene early and provide high quality early instruction in a way that reduces special ed referrals down the road and also reduces discipline behaviors that take kids out of class down the road. We know that we have a lot of work to do. We're eager to do it, but we really do need all Vermonters and every single school board to come to the table and give us your best in terms of how we approach these challenges moving forward so we can do what's right for our kids. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca.
At the Vermont School Boards Association, really appreciate the invitation to be part of this conversation. And we appreciate the sense of partnership that is embodied in the conversation. We will all need to work together in extraordinary ways to address the property tax challenge that has become so paramount for all of us. We are encouraged by the lower estimate of property tax increases statewide, but we also believe that working together we can do better, that in fact we can see those figures come in somewhat less just as they did last year. Education in Vermont is a joint endeavor between state officials and locally elected school boards. The state establishes general direction. It sets standards and requirements for the education system, and it administers the funding system on a statewide basis. Local boards are responsible for assuring that there's a high-quality product that's delivered in each one of our communities at a reasonable cost, and I'm regularly reminded by our boards that ultimately local voters weigh in on those local budgets and weigh in on their satisfaction with the work of the local boards. The current pressure on property taxes will require action by people at all levels in government. It is not a time to defend the status quo in any form. There are a number of variables related to property tax issues that are likely to be addressed during this session. I want to concur with the governor and the secretary that a major focus needs to be on the cost per student while maintaining and building quality. This can't be a discussion about some kind of race to the bottom. We value education too much as a state. We need to make sure that we are continuing to build quality and pay attention to quality while we address this issue of cost per student. Education costs are driven by school district decisions as well as by state and federal mandates, as well as by larger economic forces, such as the cost of healthcare. We appreciate the governor's commitment to restricting new mandates in the coming session. We love education so much that virtually every session we love to come up with ideas that generally are pretty good ideas, often are good ideas, but many times have costs associated, and we really need to resist the temptation this year to be seeking those new kinds of opportunities that may have costs associated with them. The Vermont School Boards Association, as the Secretary explained, has been spending a lot of time with our members, educating our members on the cost of education per student and on the primary cost drivers, the largest of which has already been explained by the charts over here, that has to do with the number of staff who work in our schools relative to the number of students. As we have lost 20% of our students or so, our staffing levels have not decreased appreciably. And this is driven in part by special student needs, by new obligations that are put on schools. But most of all, it's driven by the fact that we have very small schools, and it is very difficult to reduce staff proportionally as the number of students decline. We have to find strategies to address that issue. I want to offer my personal thanks to the Secretary and to the Governor for making her available to the degree that she was this past fall. It was quite extraordinary to have a state official spend many hours driving all around the state to these meetings. Our board members responded extraordinarily well, both in terms of attending the meetings, but also in response to the messages that she shared. You heard the messages that she gave. She has a very disarming way of presenting very difficult information, but in a fairly optimistic, with a fairly optimistic measure. We need to do this for the students of the state of Vermont. Boards understand that it is time to be making very difficult staffing decisions and for considering joint ventures with neighbors in order to offer robust programs in a time of shrinking student enrollment. Boards are taking this challenge very seriously. We have heard from a number of areas of Vermont wanting to talk about what do we do, because our choices when you're looking at wanting to keep your budget increase at a reasonable level given your student count, what are the choices? The choices are that we eliminate a program, that we reduce the amount of music that's available, we reduce the number of hours of phys ed, whatever the program decisions are that they are faced with, or are there other alternatives? Could we come together with some of our neighbors in ways that allow us to maintain quality program, but at a cost that will be more reasonable for all of us? School board members work very hard to serve the children and taxpayers of their communities. You all know that. You watch these meetings, and last year there were a number of communities that really struggled with what to do about their school budgets. Our membership continues to be committed to finding ways locally to reduce costs without sacrificing quality, and they are very committed to working with the governor and the legislature in seeking ways to address the overall property tax situation. Again, I want to thank the governor's office and the secretary for their strong sense of partnership in trying to address these issues in a way that's respectful to our communities, but which is going to achieve the objective, which is high quality education for all of our children at a cost that's sustainable on into the future. So thank you. Appreciate it.
So you all don't, many don't know Elaine, or maybe many of you do, but Elaine Pickney is the superintendent of Chittenden South and delighted to be with us. Thank you.
So the Vermont superintendents are pleased to be working with the governor's office to address what we all acknowledge is a tough challenge, balancing the needs of our students and our own aspirations for excellent quality education for these students, and the reality that there isn't a simple solution to addressing that challenge. The Vermont Superintendents Association and the Vermont School Boards Association are committed to working collaboratively with the governor's office and with the legislature to do whatever we can so that in the end we have the very best outcomes for our students, all Vermont students, and for our communities. Thank you.
We'd be happy to take questions if you have.
Could somebody make the case that there's accounting shenanigans in coming up with this tax rate?
I'll let the commissioner who never does shenanigans.
No, and some of the staff who's worked on these numbers are here. It's complex, and it's consensus between the legislative staff and the administration staff, so no room for games.
How much is not going forward with the pre-K mandate going to save taxpayers? Will the property tax rate be otherwise?
It's going to have a very marginal impact, to be candid, because most of the communities are going ahead with pre-K. So it's important to remember that this is a optional delay, and many of the communities have already moved forward with universal pre-K. I think the second point to remember is all of the evidence suggests that pre-K reduces costs. It doesn't increase costs in the long run. When you give a student a strong start, it ensures that they are more enthusiastic, ready, and able to learn going forward, and it reduces special ed and other costs going forward. So in the long run, it's not only the right thing to do for the students, it's a cost cut.